Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland. So I just want to talk about the current political situation in the UK with the sudden resignation of Owen Patterson MP, a Conservative. And there have been a lot of machinations about him over the past few days. His lobbying in an unethical manner, the way that Boris Johnson tried to save him, and as Angela Rayner pithily put it, when they break the rules, the government then try to remake the rules. But even if you do change the rules, that doesn't undo the fact that you've already broken them, because it's not retrospective. In future, you'll be able to do that thing that you were prohibited from doing, but there's no retroactivity. What you did at the time was forbidden, and therefore you're still in the wrong on that one. So Owen Patterson was in material breach of the lobbying rules in quite a serious way. And Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of Her Majesty's most loyal opposition, has gone on the attack about this one. But ultimately, not that many people will care about it. It's not really impacting them. They'll probably think, oh, most politicians are dodgy, so Labour will just be just as deceitful. Obviously, should be some ethical bottom line for standards, and Owen Patterson fell below that. He was elected to Parliament in 1997, which was annus horribilis for the Conservative Party. His wife took her own life last year, and he says that they've been hounded by the media, and this witch hunt materially contributed to her self-destruction. Anyway, so there's a standards system to try and uphold some sort of ethical standards for members of Parliament. Is all pursuant to the findings of the Nolan Commission on Standards in Public Life, which is impanelled in the mid-90s when John Major, a Conservative, was Prime Minister. And indeed, Sir John Major has lambasted the Johnson administration, saying that they are well below par on ethical issues. So Patterson faced a 30-day suspension from the House of Commons and will be docked 30 days' worth of pay, and now he's resigned. He was lobbying on behalf of two companies. But until just a few days ago, the cabinet line was that what he did was permissible, or at least excusable. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, was publicly advocating for him and saying that they ought to, people who are found in breach of the rules ought to be permitted to appeal and so on. Anyway, so Sir Keir has said, this is, this is shabby behaviour, to say the least. And he seems to be genuinely exercised about this, Sir Keir Starmer. He's offended. Obviously, he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service and had to be careful to be always acting ethically. Prosecutorial misconduct could be fatal to a prosecution. And obviously, towards the end, he wasn't personally handling prosecutions. He had to superintend the whole system with hundreds of people below him. But it's just sort of impressionistic. In 6 months' time, not even political anoraks will remember the particulars of this, but the overall sense is that the government, they're shysters and so on. Anyway, and so Sir Keir has been very keen to try and attach this to Boris Johnson for having sought to defend Owen Patterson long after Owen Patterson's career was no longer viable. So Labour's really gone on the attack on this one. Obviously, Conservatives, the thing for them to do is to concede and move on. Only on Wednesday last week, the Conservative MPs on the Standards Committee voted against the recommendation of the Standards Commissioner that Patterson be suspended. And the Conservatives said, well, we're going to reformulate the rules about ethical standards and how alleged breaches are dealt with. Something which is not going to excite many people beyond the Westminster Village, but leaves a bad taste in the mouth. So Patterson had been paid £100,000 a year per annum in addition to his salary to be a consultant for a clinical diagnostics company, Randox, since 2015. He'd also worked for Lynn's Country Foods since 2016. So he'd broken the rule on advocacy because he spoke to the Food Standards Agency thrice on issues which were pertinent to Randox about testing for antibiotics in milk, so trying to advantage them. He made a number of approaches to the Food Standards Agency in relation to Lynn's Country Foods and so on, speaking to the Department for Information and Development and about Randox and blood testing and on and on. He hadn't declared his interest. There's this register of members' interest. I'm not sure if it's actually compulsory, but so far as I know, every MP is on it. I remember when it came in, it was optional. And so far as I can think, John Enoch Pole, the MP for South Down at the time, was the only MP who refused to sign up, saying, if I'm elected by the good people of my constituency, that's it. And no, I'm not going to comply with this recommendation because, as I say, it was not obligatory at the time. And I think it's now mandatory. Another thing is Patterson, in his correspondence, he hadn't mentioned that he was a paid consultant to some of these companies when he was asking questions which were relevant to these companies' activities. He used his parliamentary office on 16 occasions for business meetings with his clients, and that's a real no-no. It's a complete failure to distinguish between public and private. So he was abusing his access to Parliament and various governmental agencies to seek to act in furtherance of private commercial interests. Likewise, he wrote letters relating to his business activities on House of Commons headed notepaper, as in to sort of lend it some gravitas, and actually simply a misuse of the stationery. That's the public money pays for that. I know it's a trifling amount, but if they start wasting pennies, they'll waste more and more. They shouldn't waste any public money at all. He's doing on our time, on our dime, as the Americans would say. So the Conservatives are just behind in a poll that was published today. But, Labour should be doing rather better coming into mid-term, because the various stages of a parliamentary term is obviously the one party wins the election and they shoot up straight away. People jump on the bandwagon. Yeah, they give them a chance. People are bored of politics, which means they don't want to hear from the opposition. So there's that honeymoon for a few months. It'll wobble a little bit. And then it's going to be the decline. So we're in the decline now. I mean, it was surprisingly long honeymoon. Okay, it declined at some point during coronavirus, came back up. But anyway, overall, we're in the main decline. And just how long does that decline go on for? How deep is that decline? And then the recovery in the months leading up to a general election. People scrutinise the opposition. They've laid out their pitch. What have they got to offer? It might be worse. And some people tend to forgive the government for its failings, its dishonesties and so on. But Keir Starmer's not really connecting. Now, I asked some politics students some time ago, 14 of them actually, who's the leader of the Liberal Democrats? Not one of them knew. Now, that is a damning indictment of Sir Ed Davey, is his name, by the way, the MP for Kingston South and Surbiton. So he's the virtually invisible man. You think back to Charles Kennedy, often panned as a chat show Charlie, seen as a lightweight, but his affability knew no bounds. So he was perhaps the most genial of the party leaders at Westminster at the time. And he said that there's not a lot of limelight or airtime for the leader of the third party, so he took every single opportunity to be on any programme he could, and people just got to know him, even if he wasn't really opining. He seemed likeable, and likability is an important asset in politics. And just he had name recognition, he had face recognition, which Sir Ed Davey doesn't. He's on the bland side. He's not terrible bore. So, but he's really just not making an impact. And as I say, I don't think that Sir Keir Starmer is connecting as well as he should be. There'll be no disasters on his watch. And admittedly, one of his MPs, the one for Leicester East, took over from the scandal-struck Keith Vaz, or Keith Vaseline, as some people call him. And she was just convicted of harassing some woman in a dispute over a man for whom they had romantic feelings. So she's been sentenced to something or other. I think she's avoided jail, but she's a Labour MP. Well, she was dismissed from the party as soon as she was convicted, but trying to get her to stand down. Or she's obviously allowed to stay to the next Parliament. I mean, I think she should stay, actually, because we need people, all sorts of people, including those who've been convicted of crimes. I mean, they're members of the public too, and represent those who've been through the criminal justice system. It doesn't undo the fact that she was elected, obviously. She's not going to be allowed back to the Labour Party for a long time, never be a parliamentary candidate again. She's dragged their name through the mire, so they don't want to be associated with her any longer. But she might still do a passable job of representing her constituents and bring a certain broader view, a view that doesn't get articulated in the House of Commons enough. People are being convicted of something. And anyway, that's enough from me. So please donate it with the greatest possible of liberality on PayPal. You know how to find me there. Toodaloo.